The wrestling world exploded when Drew McIntyre walked into Monday Night Raw, and what happened next left every single person watching absolutely speechless, because this wasn't just another loss or another setback but something far more devastating that nobody saw coming. And if you think you know what happened, you have no idea how deep this really goes. Before we dive into the complete destruction of one of WWE's top stars, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because you're going to want to follow along with everything that unfolds in this insane story. Drew McIntyre has been one of the most dominant forces in WWE for years now, standing at 6'5", weighing 265 pounds of pure Scottish fury, and the man has held multiple championships, conquered legends, and carved out a legacy that should have been untouchable. But something shifted in the company, and what they did to him on Raw wasn't just a storyline twist, it was a complete dismantling of everything he's built. The show opened with McIntyre coming out to address the crowd, and you could feel the energy in the arena because everyone knew something big was about to happen, but nobody was prepared for what actually went down when the music hit, and out came someone who completely changed the trajectory of Drew's entire career. McIntyre grabbed the microphone and started talking about his journey in WWE, reminding everyone how he was fired years ago, went back to the independent circuit, rebuilt himself from nothing, and clawed his way back to the top of the biggest wrestling company in the world. He talked about winning the WWE Championship at WrestleMania in front of 0 fans during the pandemic era, and how that moment was stolen from him because he deserved to have thousands of people cheering for him, but instead he celebrated alone in an empty performance center. Every word he spoke carried weight, and you could tell this was personal because Drew wasn't just cutting a promo, he was laying his heart on the line and telling the world that he deserved better than what he's been given. Then the interruption came, and it wasn't who anyone expected, because when that music hit, the entire arena lost their minds, and Drew's face went from confident to completely shocked in a split second. The person who walked out onto that stage wasn't just another wrestler, it was someone who had history with McIntyre, someone who knew all his weaknesses, and someone who clearly had no problem exposing every single one of them in front of millions of people watching around the world. The verbal assault that followed was brutal because this person didn't hold back, talking about how Drew had become soft, how he'd lost his edge, and how he was no longer the same warrior who fought his way back to WWE, but instead had turned into someone who complained about opportunities instead of taking them. Drew tried to fire back, but every word he said was countered with something even more cutting, and you could see the frustration building in his face because he knew deep down that some of what was being said was actually true. The crowd was split, some people chanting for McIntyre while others were cheering for the person who was systematically destroying him with nothing but words and a microphone. This went on for what felt like forever but was probably only 10 minutes, and by the end of it Drew looked defeated before a single punch was even thrown, and that's when things got even worse. The general manager came out and announced that Drew McIntyre would be facing this person in a match later that night, but there was a stipulation that made everyone's jaw drop because it wasn't just a regular match, it was a career-threatening situation where if Drew lost he would be moved down to the midcard permanently with no chance at another world title opportunity for an entire year. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and you could see the panic in Drew's eyes because he knew that losing this match meant losing everything he'd worked for since returning to WWE. The person he was facing smiled that evil smile that only a true villain can pull off and walked back up the ramp, leaving Drew standing in the ring knowing that his entire future was on the line. The rest of the show built toward this match with backstage segments showing Drew preparing mentally and physically while his opponent was shown laughing and talking about how easy this was going to be. Other wrestlers were interviewed about their predictions, and almost everyone said that Drew was finished because he'd been on a losing streak lately and his confidence was shattered. One former champion even said that Drew had lost the killer instinct that made him great, and that once you lose that in WWE you never get it back no matter how hard you try. When the match finally started, the atmosphere in the arena was electric because everyone knew they were about to witness something historic one way or another. Drew came out first looking focused and determined, but you could still see the doubt in his eyes because he knew what was at stake, and he knew that one mistake could cost him everything. His opponent came out next looking completely confident and relaxed, like this was just another day at the office, and that psychological advantage was huge before the bell even rang. The opening moments of the match saw Drew using his size and strength advantage to dominate, throwing his opponent around the ring with suplexes and power moves that had the crowd on their feet. For a few minutes it looked like McIntyre was going to pull off the victory and save his main event status, but then something happened that changed everything because his opponent rolled out of the ring, grabbed a steel chair, and the referee was conveniently distracted by something happening at ringside. Drew saw the chair coming and tried to defend himself, but he was too slow and the chair shot connected right across his skull with a sickening sound that echoed throughout the arena. The referee turned around just in time to see Drew collapsing to the mat, but somehow didn't see the chair shot, even though everyone watching at home and in the arena saw exactly what happened. Drew's opponent tossed the chair out of the ring, covered Drew for the pin, and the referee counted 1, 2, 3, and just like that it was over. Drew McIntyre had lost the match, and with it his status as a main event player in WWE for at least the next 12 months, and the look on his face when he realized what had just happened was absolutely heartbreaking. The celebration that followed was disgusting because his opponent stood over Drew's broken body and laughed while holding their arms up in victory, and the commentary team sold it like this was the worst thing that could possibly happen to McIntyre's career. Replay showed the illegal chair shot from multiple angles, making it crystal clear that Drew had been screwed, but in WWE once the decision is made it's final and there's no going back. Drew slowly got to his feet holding his head and looking around at the crowd like he couldn't believe what had just happened, and some fans were actually crying because they knew they'd just witnessed the burial of one of their favorite wrestlers. Backstage after the match, Drew was shown sitting alone in the locker room with his head in his hands while other wrestlers walked by and avoided making eye contact because nobody wanted to be associated with someone who just got demoted. One wrestler stopped and tried to offer some words of encouragement, but Drew just told him to leave and that he wanted to be alone. The camera zoomed in on Drew's face and you could see the mixture of anger, sadness and disbelief because this was a man who had given everything to WWE and in one night they took it all away from him. The decision to bury Drew McIntyre like this shocked everyone because he's been a loyal company guy for years, never complained publicly about his booking and always did whatever was asked of him whether it made sense or not. Industry insiders started reporting immediately after the show that this burial was planned weeks in advance and that Drew had no idea it was coming, which makes it even worse because he walked into that arena thinking he was getting another big push but instead got completely destroyed. The reasoning behind this decision apparently came from the very top of WWE management, who felt that Drew wasn't connecting with audiences the way they wanted and that his character had become stale. Critics of this decision pointed out that Drew has consistently gotten strong reactions from crowds and that his merchandise sales were still solid, so there was no real justification for burying him this badly. Others argued that WWE has a history of doing this to wrestlers they once pushed to the top only to turn on them when they decide to go in a different creative direction. The list of wrestlers who've been buried by WWE after being built up is long and includes some of the biggest names in wrestling history, so Drew McIntyre is just the latest victim of a pattern that's been going on for decades. Social media exploded after Raw went off the air with fans expressing their outrage at what they just witnessed, and the hashtag about Drew McIntyre trend worldwide for hours. Some fans said they were going to stop watching WWE because they were tired of seeing their favorite wrestlers get buried for no good reason. Others said this was typical WWE behavior and that they weren't surprised at all because the company has proven time and time again that they don't care what fans think and will do whatever they want regardless of the reaction. Wrestling journalists wrote articles breaking down the burial and explaining why this was such a terrible decision from both a creative and business standpoint. The comparison to other wrestlers who've been buried by WWE started immediately, with people bringing up names from the past who never recovered from similar treatment. Some wrestlers were able to eventually work their way back to the top, but many others were never the same and ended up leaving the company or fading into obscurity. The big question now is which category Drew McIntyre will fall into and whether he'll be able to overcome this setback or if this is the beginning of the end of his time as a top star in WWE. Former WWE wrestlers who are no longer with the company weighed in on social media, with many of them saying they knew exactly how Drew felt because they'd experienced similar burials during their time there. One former world champion said that WWE has a pattern of building wrestlers up just to tear them down and that it's one of the most frustrating aspects of working for the company. Another ex-WWE star said that Drew should start thinking about his options outside of WWE because once the company decides to bury you, it's almost impossible to recover and your career is essentially over as far as main event status goes. The immediate future for Drew McIntyre looks bleak based on this burial because being stuck in the midcard with no world title opportunities for a year means he'll likely be working with lower card talent and having meaningless matches that don't lead anywhere. This is the kiss of death for a main event wrestler because once the audience gets used to seeing you in that position, it's almost impossible to elevate yourself back to the top even after the year-long ban is lifted. WWE will probably have Drew lose most of his matches during this period to further damage his credibility, and by the time he's theoretically allowed to challenge for a world title again, nobody will take him seriously as a legitimate threat. The business side of this decision is equally baffling because Drew McIntyre is still relatively young at 39 years old and has plenty of good years left in him. He's proven he can carry a world title, he can work with anyone on the roster, and he's over with the audience, so why would WWE choose to bury him like this instead of continuing to use him in a prominent role? The only explanation that makes sense is that someone in power simply doesn't like Drew or doesn't believe in him anymore, and when that happens in WWE, there's nothing you can do about it because creative decisions aren't based on logic or what's best for business but rather on the personal preferences of a small group of people. What makes this even more frustrating for Drew and his fans is that he was seemingly in line for another world championship run based on recent storylines and the way he was being positioned on television. There were rumors that Drew was going to win a major title at an upcoming premium live event and that he was going to have a long reign that would solidify his legacy as one of the all-time greats. Instead, all of those plans were apparently scrapped at the last minute and replaced with this burial angle that serves no purpose other than to tear down a wrestler who could still be a valuable asset to the company. The locker room reaction to this burial was reportedly mixed, with some wrestlers feeling bad for Drew while others saw it as an opportunity for themselves to move up the card. That's the nature of professional wrestling, where one person's misfortune becomes another person's opportunity, and there's very little loyalty or sympathy when it comes to fighting for your spot. Drew has always been well liked backstage and is considered a locker room leader, so many of his peers were upset to see him get buried like this, but at the end of the day everyone is worried about their own position and their own push. Looking at the historical context of WWE burials, this one ranks pretty high on the list of most brutal because it was done on live television in front of millions of people, and the stipulation attached to the match made it impossible for Drew to save face even in defeat. When you lose a match that costs you your main event status for an entire year, there's no spinning that is anything other than a complete and total burial. The fact that it was done via an illegal chair shot that the referee somehow didn't see makes it even worse because it presents Drew as both weak for not being able to overcome the cheating and stupid for falling into such an obvious trap. The long-term implications of this burial could extend far beyond just 1 year, because once WWE decides that someone isn't worthy of being in the main event picture, it's rare that they ever change their mind. There have been exceptions over the years, but they're few and far between and usually require the wrestler to completely reinvent themselves or get so over with the audience that the company has no choice but to push them. Drew McIntyre already did the whole reinvention thing when he came back to WWE after being fired, so what's he supposed to do now to get back to the top? The answer is that he probably can't, and this burial might be the thing that eventually leads to him leaving WWE when his contract is up. The creative team responsible for this angle clearly didn't think through the consequences of what they were doing, because burying a top star like Drew McIntyre doesn't just hurt him, it hurts the entire roster. When fans see that WWE is willing to treat one of their favorites this badly, it makes them less likely to invest emotionally in other wrestlers because they know that WWE could turn on those wrestlers at any moment too. This creates a cynical fan base that doesn't believe in anything the company does and only watches out of habit rather than genuine excitement. That's terrible for business, and it's something WWE has struggled with for years as their ratings and attendance numbers have declined. What should have happened instead of this burial is that WWE should have kept building Drew McIntyre as a top star and given him another world championship run that would have elevated him even further. They could have had him chase the title for a few months, building sympathy and momentum before finally winning it at a big show and then having a reign where he beats everyone and looks like an unstoppable force. That would have been the smart creative decision that would have made money and kept fans happy, but instead WWE chose to do the exact opposite and tear down someone they spent years building up. The psychological impact of this burial on Drew McIntyre as a performer cannot be understated, because when you get buried like this on television, it affects your confidence and your belief in yourself. No matter how professional you are and no matter how much you understand that this is just a storyline, there's a part of you that internalizes the rejection and starts to question whether you're good enough. Drew has been through a lot in his career, including being fired from WWE and having to rebuild himself, so he's mentally tough, but even the toughest people have their breaking point, and this burial might be what pushes him over the edge. The fan reaction to this burial has been overwhelmingly negative, with very few people defending WWE's decision to do this to Drew McIntyre. Even the most loyal WWE fans, who usually support everything the company does, have admitted that this was a mistake and that it makes no sense from any perspective. When you've lost even your most hardcore supporters, you know you've made a terrible creative decision, and that's exactly what happened here. The question now is whether WWE will acknowledge the negative reaction and try to fix this situation, or if they'll just ignore the criticism and move forward with their plans regardless of what fans think. In conclusion, what WWE did to Drew McIntyre on Raw was one of the most brutal burials in recent memory, and it's going to have lasting consequences for both Drew's career and the company as a whole. This wasn't just a loss, it was a systematic destruction of a top star who deserved better treatment after everything he's given to WWE over the years. Whether Drew can recover from this remains to be seen, but history suggests that once WWE decides to bury someone, they rarely change their mind, and the wrestler's career is essentially over as far as main event status goes. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Drew McIntyre's burial, make sure to subscribe to stay updated on all the latest wrestling news and controversies, because there's always something crazy happening in WWE.